Welcome to Tucker Carlson. Today, Michael Flynn was Donald Trump's first national security advisor. Of all the high-level Trump appointees, Michael Flynn may have been the most qualified. He was a three-star Army general. He received his first star after only 23 years in the United States Army. Almost all of his time was deployed. He spent 5 years in Iraq and years in other countries around the world, serving with Special Operations Forces. Then he moved into the intel world. He was number 2 for national intelligence, and he ran the Defense Intelligence Agency. He had a deep background in American intelligence gathering and in how the U.S. government worked. So he was, again, probably the most qualified person chosen as national security advisor in memory. And then in days, he was gone. In the chaos of the early Trump administration, you probably remember it well, out of nowhere, Michael Flynn was accused of crimes. And on February 13th, 2017, he left the White House. He was later charged by the Department of Justice effectively for lying to the FBI. And then we never heard from Michael Flynn. In 4 years, he did not give a single interview. Meanwhile, the entire news media talked about him, but we never heard from the man they were talking about. There was a lot going on in the country at the time, as you recall, and for a lot of us, his name faded from memory. Michael Flynn. They tell us he did something wrong. What exactly did he do? And then on to the next thing. Speaking for our show, it wasn't until May of 2020, years after the fact, that evidence came to the surface that showed very clearly Michael Flynn did nothing wrong. The whole thing was a setup. It was a hit. Here was our assessment for May of 2020, years late, by the way, but this is what we finally concluded. Michael Flynn did not commit a crime, and they knew it. How did they know? Because the FBI had already tapped Michael Flynn's phone, which itself is a shocking outrage, completely unacceptable in a free country, that for some reason nobody in Washington seems to notice or care about. They should. Because the FBI already knew what Flynn had said in the call in detail, there was, the department announced today, quote, no justification or need to review Mr. Flynn as to his own personal recollections of what had been said, because they knew. In other words, the whole thing was a setup from the first moment. How often does the FBI set people up? How many other lives have they destroyed without the public knowing about it? In other words, this isn't about Michael Flynn, it's about you. It's scary to think about that. So for years, you have heard people on television dismiss General Michael Flynn as crazy, a conspiracy nut, as unqualified. He is, of course, none of those things. The opposite is true in every case. And it's possible that's why they took him out. But you can decide for yourself today, because Michael Flynn joins us in studio to describe what has happened to him. General, thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it.
It's a real honor to be here.
And my apologies to you for taking so long to connect the dots in your case. There was just a flurry. Of course, your life was completely defined by what happened to you, but for the rest of us who are paid to watch what's happening to American society, there was just so much going on, and your case was wholly defined by your enemies, who acted with speed and maximum aggression, as they always do, and you were not speaking on your own behalf. And so they effectively defined you in your case, and it was only again when the evidence emerged that it became clear that they took out the national security advisor of the United States, and they did it purely for political reasons in a way that should terrify all of us. Anyway, I'm grateful that you're here, and I'm happy that you've emerged from all of this. Why do you think, and who do you think took you out as national security advisor?
So it's very clear now that the previous administration, previous to the Trump administration, so Barack Obama, Joe Biden, members of his team, members of Obama's team, they were definitely part of this whole thing. And it goes all the way down to the lead agents in the Crossfire Hurricane investigation. One of the fascinating documents I think is really worth pursuing and looking at for anybody that really wants to know this case. One of the lead agents by the name of Barnett in October of 2020, so not that long ago, I mean a year ago now, right? Barnett gave a testimony, 302, which is one of the FBI forms, and it's about 9 pages long, and it's essentially his testimony as to what, because I think he felt guilty. He was telling the court and the Attorney General what happened. And he waited until October of 2020 to do this. So this is the lead agent for Crossfire Hurricane. He was a guy that I met with a number of times, an FBI agent that I met with a number of times during my cooperating agreement. And he seemed like a decent guy, but I think he just got a guilt complex. And in the fall of 2020, October 2020, about a 9-page 302, and in it, he essentially says the entire effort was get Flynn to get Trump. Yeah. And I mean, it's that clear. And so when you think about what you described in May, I think that's really that's good clarity for viewers, because it took so many years for the truth to rise to the top. And the one thing that I always felt from the beginning, because I knew what was happening at that time, I felt it like, boy, these people are coming after me because they know they do not want me around Trump. They know what I know about them, and I'm talking about the CIA primarily, the intelligence community, parts of the Department of Defense, parts of the State Department, and many other elements within our government. And they did not want me advising President Trump in the most senior national security position in the United States of America. And so when I learned eventually, and I learned this even previous to Barnett, that the effort was to get Flynn to get Trump. I mean, he pretty much said that in his deposition. And as I think about that, and I think you said this in a couple of your commentaries over time, the American people, they saw through this from the very beginning, because it wasn't about Mike Flynn. It wasn't even about Donald Trump. It was about them. And when the left and the media started to attack the presidency of the United States of America, the American people saw that, hey, this is an attack on us.
Yes.
And thank God for me, because, and for my family and I, because the American people actually came to our aid. So in a funny way, the more quiet I was, because I just made the decision that I wasn't going to say anything until this whole mess was over with. But the more that they beat on me, the more that the media came and attacked me and called me all sorts of names, people dug more and more into my life and dug more and more into everything that surrounded what was happening. And it actually became a huge stain on the justice system in the United States of America. And this will, I'm not certain, Tucker, if this stain can ever be cleaned. I really don't, because you're talking about the National Security Advisor of the United States of America to the President of the United States. And it's an extraordinary assault on frankly, everything that we believe in this country.
On democracy itself.
Yeah.
And you have to ask, and this is ultimately what made me interested in your case, is why did they single you out? So this is a brand new administration. I think the number is about 3,000 appointees are hired at the beginning of every administration for all kinds of different jobs. National Security Advisor is a top job, of course, but there are other big jobs.
Oh, yeah.
They didn't go after those guys. They went after you with real intensity from the very beginning. Now, the two things they said about you were that you were crazy and that you were dishonest. And it shouldn't, I guess, surprise our viewers to learn that the opposite is true in both of those cases. There were a lot of incompetent people hired
Absolutely.
in this administration. Like, I've almost never seen that many incompetent people in one room. Omarosa actually got hired.
Yep.
Jared Kushner. I mean, just this long list. You actually had the deepest grounding
Right.
in the U.S. government and how things actually work, the most knowledge of the intel community of anybody in the entire administration. Maybe that's why they went after you.
Well, not just from a military perspective. I mean, my time as up as the Assistant Director of National Intelligence, I was responsible for a lot of domestic issues, definitely responsible for a lot of international issues. My time as the head of one of the largest intelligence agencies in the world, the Defense Intelligence Agency, which is the military's arm of the intelligence community. We're in 142 countries around the world. I mean, I've been on 6 continents. Not just my time in combat in Iraq and Afghanistan and elsewhere, Middle East, Caribbean, Central America in my earlier years in the military, but I had extensive international, foreign, and domestic experiences, and both from military, law enforcement, security, intelligence, diplomacy, all those issues that you deal with. And that was one of the reasons why when I started to help Trump candidate Trump in 2016, that we were attracted to each other because his view of the world, and I'm a military guy by training, but I'm anti-war. I'm not one of these guys that wants to go to war. I mean, it's like that's the last thing we have to do. But we have people.
How long did you spend in Iraq?
I spent better part of 5 years.
Okay.
Iraq and Afghanistan. I say I lived in Iraq and I vacationed in Afghanistan for the better part of 5 years. Yeah, my life, and that's my family's life too. And
you've earned those views.
Well, I mean, I also when I look at the decisions that were made, and so he and I shared a lot of conversations about strategic decisions that were made that got us to where we are today. And that's not just in the Middle East, but that's everything. That's trade. That's our political system, the direction that the country has started to turn toward. And I think that everybody is starting to see that now. If I take a step back and look at this from sort of the 60,000 foot level, my case and my situation is really a microcosm of what is happening in the larger enterprise of the United States of America right now. I mean, the takeover of our system of government by a few to rule the many, so to speak. They had to get rid of people like me because as the National Security Advisor, I'm responsible for everything. I mean, for pretty much everything in terms of the security system of our country, and then the principal advisor to the President of the United States. And you're a cabinet position. You're in a cabinet position appointed by the President, not necessarily. You don't have to be nominated to the Senate or any of that kind of stuff.
Right.
You don't have to go through all that. So what they had to do is they had to figure out a way to get to me and to describe me in a way that made it sound like, okay, he's just a crazy guy. All these bad things that he's done in his career. And I'm like saying to myself, wait a second. I mean, you look at my career and it's really a pretty stellar career. I'm proud of it. Well,
if you're crazy, why did you work for Barack Obama running the Defense Intelligence
Twice
Agency?
Barack Obama appointed me for two different positions, 2 3-star positions, and twice I was confirmed by the Senate, fully confirmed, 100% confirmed by the Senate. So they have to look at every single aspect of your life. And that was so I'm working for Trump in 2015 and 2016, and then of course a little bit in 2017. I had just left the military in 2014. So what changed, right?
You had just been working for Obama.
I had just been working for Obama for previous to that.
Literally. So if you're running one of our biggest intelligence agencies, it's fair to say you know the country's secrets.
Yeah.
I mean, how could you not? That's your job, right?
Right. It's not just the secrets of the system and how we operate, but it's how we're organized. It's how decisions are made. It's who is actually in control of the government. I used to joke in one of my jobs I think it was at DIA that, to the people that were working for me at the time, I used to say that in the military, just a pure military unit, if you gave an order, turn right, the entire formation would turn right, and people would do what you asked them to do. In the federal government, in a bureaucracy, you tell the organization to turn right, they're going to give you a white paper or a long missive about why they can't do that. That they're going to basically tell you in reams and reams of paper why they can't do what you just asked them to do. And you're saying, well, wait a second, I'm the boss. I say we've got to operate in this. We have to make these changes for the betterment of this organization and for the budgets that we're going to have or the budgets that we're not going to have. And you run into a bureaucracy, and I understood that bureaucracy. I understood that bureaucracy in spades, and they knew it. And the kinds of things that I was asking about. So after Trump won, and I think it was a big surprise to everybody.
Yep.
In November of 2016, when he won, and I was the second person that he appointed into any jobs. So chief of staff was the first one, and I think I was the next day. And so I started once I was appointed in that position, I went to work. And as you would expect a person, as the American people should expect anybody that's going into a significant job like that to do. So I went to work and I started to ask questions. And they're the type of very, very uncomfortable questions that people in government don't like to be asked by people like the National Security Advisor. I mean, if it's some other bumpkin in government somewhere, it doesn't make any difference. But, because they're not going to be able to affect who you are. But if it's the National Security Advisor that begins to ask about programs and budgets and organizations and structures and decisions that have been made in the past, and because I knew what many of these were, I had already studied them. I had studied them in droves when I was as the director of the Defense Intelligence Agency, because I had to. I mean, you would expect, that's what I would expect somebody in that position to do, was to really understand what it was that we were about and what kinds of decisions we're going to make. We're making decisions, Tucker, not only about people's lives, but we're making decisions about the government's relationships with alliances around the world that are going to have lasting impacts that will change the course of history for this country. So when I started to ask a lot of these questions, I knew that there was a discomfort, particularly in some realms of the intelligence community, and they would always have to come back to me with more, right? Because they would go, "Oh, we don't have that, we don't have that information right now." And I said, "Well, I'd like to see that. Next time I want you to set up another meeting, and I want to go through this again and again and again." The other thing too that was very clear, and I knew that I was going to do, because that's, if you look at my career, particularly the second half of my career, I started to take over larger and larger organizations. And one of the aspects of Mike Flynn in the military was I'm a very reform-minded guy. And so I would look at organizations and I would adjust those organizations for the times that we face, right? For the types of wars that we're in, for the types of leaders that we have. You have to make constant changes and adjustments, and that's healthy for any organization. So one of the things that I had talked about was I had talked about reforming the National Security Council. And at the height of the Cold War in the 80s, and then even before that, and I'll just use Henry Kissinger as a former National Security Advisor, at the height when we were facing the nuclear war against the Soviet Union at the time, the National Security Council was around 45 people. I was looking at walking into an organization that had about 400 people. And it wasn't the scale or the size of the numbers, because I had dealt with organizations from 6,000 to almost 20,000 in some of the organizations that I led. But I was looking at the ability to make decisions and make them in a rapid fashion, and also to downsize an organization that had become so bloated in the previous decade. So I wanted to go from about 400 back to the days of sort of the height of the Cold War era, down to about 45 in the National Security Council. Well, when you do that, suddenly all of these organizations of government now don't have their spies in the White House, because that's really what the National Security Council, the bloating of the National Security Council did.
So we should just say for our viewers that the NSC has people on loan from a bunch of different government agencies.
There's only really, in the National Security Council, and I appreciate you bringing that up, the National Security Council really only has about 25 actual appointees in the White House.
Right.
So you need to have a couple of other experts, because you have other issues, particularly nuclear weapons and some other subject matter expertise that you need, but you don't need to have 400 people hanging around and just call them wall walkers. And so what they have done over the years is, the more an organization can give to the National Security Council, the bigger that they can make it, the more insight they have into what's going on in the White House.
Right.
And man, you talk about, if you go back to the number of leaks, just the leaks alone at the beginning of the Trump administration in 2017, it was extraordinary. And they still don't know. They can investigate those leaks all day long. They're never going to learn where those leaks came from. The leak of the phone call, for example, between myself and the Russian ambassador, which became a really big deal. It's still a massive felony. I doubt if the Department of Justice, they're investigating school boards instead of investigating a massive, massive crime against the country itself, against not only the National Security Advisor, but against the entire country when they did something like that. So I really wanted to create a more agile National Security Council that was really the way that Trump wanted to operate. Trump he wanted to operate, and we talked about this, he wanted to operate nimbly, with a lot more agility, ability to make better decisions, and with the experts that he needed when he needed them. And so that was one of my goals in like the first, maybe 90 days, 6 months, was to downsize that. So as people came up on their times from their being loaned from the CIA or being loaned from the State Department, I was just going to let those timelines run out and let them go back to their home. And if we needed them, we could always ask for the expert, right? But what you find is it's like you're going into an enemy camp. In the case of the Trump administration, it was like walking into an enemy camp, and you felt. I mean, I felt like, I didn't feel threatened, but I felt like, man, all of these people are here to do nothing more than just hurt this president.
Yeah.
And it was like and what we've learned, so this is all public. So if people really wanted to dig into the case against Mike Flynn and all of the filings and all the things that have come out, even now, we still see stuff coming out now with this Sussman indictment and some of the other things that I think that Durham is actually is going to probably start to look at. I think it's fascinating. And I think what you learn is that we have two separate governments. We have the one that actually gets elected and goes into office. And then you have a government inside of Washington, D.C. that operates under no rules, no authorities other than their own or who's ever in charge of their
Sounds like that government was still controlled by Barack Obama.
Yeah, and I would say that to a degree is what we're operating with today. So when people talk about the deep state, and I've heard a lot of people talk about the deep state and the deep state this, the deep state that. The deep state, I don't really describe the deep state as a group of politically, of Nancy Pelosi or Chuck Schumer or some of the people that are elected. They become part of it, but they're not really the deep state. The deep state in this country are the bureaucrats and particularly the organizations that run the security apparatus. So when Eisenhower used to talk about, and he warned us, and I think in his final speech when he was departing as the president, he warned us about the military-industrial complex, and that was back in 1960. So when Eisenhower warned us about the military-industrial complex, if you fast forward to today, 2021, you can add a component to that. And the component that I would add is the security state component to the military-industrial complex. Because the security state of this country has grown probably by 5 times in the last 25 to 30 years. So when I think about, and I'll just use, I'll use the Defense Intelligence Agency to give some people perspective. In the early 2000s, so prior to 9/11, DIA was around 3,000 people. When I took it over in only about 10, 11 years later, in 2012, I took it over, it was upwards of close to 20,000 people. So it had 17,000 employees, and then we had about another 3,000 or 4,000 contractors in various shapes and forms. So in a 10-year period of time, and it really was 9/11, probably was the impetus behind some of this, but I think what happened was over time, this security state complex really joined with this military-industrial complex that Eisenhower talked about. And the dangers now that we face is we have that security state complex are all of these intelligence community agencies and activities that we have, right, that we've heard so much about, 16, 17, whatever you want that number to be today. And then who actually is in charge of them, and then what authorities or what things that they're able to do. I mean, you know this, you've lived this by them monitoring your phone calls, right? And you talked about this only a few months ago where it was like, if they can do, I mean, they were monitoring my phone calls with no warrant. They were just monitoring them because they could. And so when we talk about the deep state, it doesn't really even take somebody from the White House to say, go do it. Although in my case, somebody from the White House did actually direct it. And it's both in terms of a Barack Obama or a Joe Biden, because they had that infamous meeting on I think it was the 5th of January in 2017, where Biden talked about the Logan Act, which was another one of these crazy things, I know you've talked about that in time. So this deep state complex, the security state complex, is something that the American people are now just beginning to get a taste of.
Well, because we were assured, I mean, I grew up in Washington from when I was in high school. My dad worked for the government. I feel like I was sort of familiar with what the boundaries are supposed to be. And we were always told that the CIA in particular, which has been huge and well-funded for generations, it's, even before 9/11, but they were not allowed to conduct surveillance activities in the United States, interfere in our political system. I mean, they were outward facing, right?
Right.
So since you ran an intel agency, give us the unclassified view of what the CIA does exactly. How big is it? What kind of interference do you think they have internally?
Well, I would just tell you that the roles and responsibilities of these agencies, the CIA, DIA, National Security Agency up at Fort Meade, and then really the roles and responsibilities of the Director of National Intelligence, or what's called the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, which includes the Counterterrorism Center, the Office of Counterintelligence. I mean, these are big structures, and they're unwieldy. And who's ever in charge of them, if they are, depending on their view, depending on their political views, and frankly, whatever administration is in charge, or whoever they're kowtowing to over in Congress for a particular budget item, because you're correct when you're talking about the extraordinary amounts of money that flow through Congress and flow into these intelligence agencies and the activities that they do around the world. So the big picture, the CIA is supposed to be international. FBI as a big organization is supposed to be domestic and taking care of all those things, and they're supposed to cooperate on different aspects of what's happening, from overseas to domestic issues, right? Like terrorists that are making phone calls to their buddies in Dallas, Texas, or Baton Rouge, Louisiana, or St. Louis, Missouri. They get picked up by the National Security Agency. The CIA's tracking them, and then they're talking to somebody inside the United States. The FBI is supposed to be a nice, clean handoff. So what has happened is that those lines no longer exist. They're not even blurred. They just don't exist. And so if there is a decision made, if there's a decision made about a particular interest that somebody has, politician might have, a leader of an agency or a bureau, or the DNI themselves may have, they can direct somebody to, well, let's play this one out. You guys take this. They can direct the CIA to take it. They can direct the FBI to take it. They can direct damn near any agency or activity to take it. So that blurring of lines is gone. And I think with the advent of 9/11, and they took with all of the stuff that we learned about FISA, right? So remember the very famous abuse of the FISA court, right? They would go in there and first they would lie to the FISA court. That's egregious enough. But they would use these warrantless intercepts, and they would use those, and they would say, well, this is an international issue, so we're going to continue to listen. And then you would have these, what they would call hops off of a phone call. So I talk to you, you talk to your wife, she talks to her friend. And so they could target me, but they could listen to you, they could listen to your wife, and they could listen to the conversation she's having with her friend. And nobody would pay any attention. Somebody go, oh, hey, this is what we learned about Tucker Carlson. This is what we learned about something his wife is doing. So this is the kind of abuse that we are facing now. And so when I look at what we need to do as a nation, because we're going through this right now. I mean, the Department of Justice is a organization that is part of everything that I'm talking about. And when we talk about the CIA or DIA or the intel community or the Department of Defense and the military apparatus that we got, the industrial complex that we have of contractors, really living off the government, and in many cases we need them because they do build things that we do need. But all of this has grown into something that is really out of control, and we need to have a reckoning, I think, in our own system of government to say, what direction do we want to go?
Can I ask you a question? So you said a second ago that the intel agencies and the Department of Justice are, by definition, dependent on the Congress for funding.
Right.
So they need the Congress because they don't exist without it. So if you're gathering massive amounts of intelligence domestically, if you're listening to people's phone calls and you know their secrets, it's got to be pretty tempting to say there's Congressman X who's the head of the committee, but it turns out he's doing something creepy in his personal life. Maybe we use that against him to make sure he's always on our side. Do you think that happens?
Yes. And so if you go back to, I think it was under John Brennan as the CIA director, where they caught them basically tapping into the
Senate,
in the Senate's computers. The other part of that is that if you look at the staffers, okay, so you have permanent staff and you have temporary staff that get hired when people come into Congress, and you get appointed to a particular committee, Appropriations Committee, or the House Intelligence Committee, or the Senate Intelligence Committee, or the Senate Appropriations Committee, or the Armed Services Committee, you name it, right? Those staff positions are critical positions for people in the CIA, people in other parts of the government, to make sure that they get their guy or their gal on that staff, because they control what gets written into a bill, these bills that are 2,000 pages, right? So they not only know what these politicians are up to in their personal lives, they also are controlling what gets put into these bills.
Come on. So you're describing an autonomous government within our government.
Yeah, that's why I say there's like two governments. We're dealing.
But you're not overstating it. I mean, if they're controlling their own funding, then I mean, like they exist outside the democratic process.
Right. That's right. And I'm not overstating it. And they know exactly what I'm talking about.
So that's why they wanted to crush you. So I wanted to play this. This is Comey, Jim Comey, who famously ran the FBI. This is him after leaving December of 2018, going on MSNBC, and kind of laughing about what they did to you. Here he is.
Look at this White House now, and it's hard to imagine two FBI agents ending up in the sit room. How did that happen?
I sent them. Something I probably wouldn't have done or maybe gotten away with in a more organized investigation, a more organized administration. I thought it's early enough, let's just send a couple guys over. And so we placed a call to Flynn, said, hey, we're sending a couple guys over. Hope you'll talk to them. He said, sure. Nobody else was there. They interviewed him in a conference room at the White House Situation Room, and he lied to them. And that's what he's now pled guilty to.
What did he think they were coming over there for?
I don't think he knew. No, we didn't tell him.
So here you have all the dumb people at the 98th Street, whatever, some forum in New York City, laughing about the FBI director laughing about undermining democracy, the democracy they said they're defending. When you saw that, what did you think?
Yeah, I mean, talk about, beyond irritated. That interview that Jim Comey did that day demonstrates the level of arrogance that oozes out of people like him, but also out of the organization that he led and the culture that exists, particularly in Washington, D.C., in the FBI, and in the Department of Justice. I mean, that sense of arrogance that we are above all of this, and we're not even going to follow the law. When he said an unorganized investigation, that's what he meant. And then he said an unorganized White House. He really meant an unorganized investigation. And what we learned over time was that the FBI, the couple of guys that came in to talk to me, they actually changed. So they said that we went in there. Flynn was candid. He was great. He didn't lie to us. And so they ended up changing the document that ended up going in front of the court. And so we know that today. So I always say I went through persecution for a lie that I didn't ever state, and for a pardon that I didn't want.
You didn't want the pardon?
No, I didn't want it at all. I didn't want it because I didn't deserve it. I mean, it was one of these things where the Department of Justice, after a 6-month special counsel investigation led by a attorney that was brought in, an attorney general that was brought in from outside of Washington, D.C. After 6 months, he said, he basically recommended to dismiss my case for egregious government misconduct because they abused the entire system of law. And then, of course, then I had to deal with a court or a judge for about another 6 months who was, who was operating as though he was in the French system of government where he was going to be the jury, the judge and the executioner, and that lasted another 6 months.
Totally out of control. Judge Emmett Sullivan, I
Judge
think.
Sullivan, right.
So you spent your entire life in the Army in government service at this point.
Right.
So you didn't go to work. By the way, you got out of Defense Intelligence, 3-star general. You could have gone to work for Lockheed or done what everyone else did. You didn't.
Yep.
Which is the more noble path, I would say, but it's the less remunerative path. So you didn't have any money. How much do you think in the end you spent on legal defense?
I would say, I want to swear on your show, because it was ass pain, but I will say that because it's more than the finances. But it's from my selling my home, going through the incredible levels of embarrassment that you do go through, this humbling experience, but it was really strengthened by our faith. I mean, it's in the millions. It's definitely in the millions. It's so, it ranges between $4 and $8 million that cost my family, and it's still costing my family. And
you're one of 9.
I'm one of 9 children.
So it's a huge family.
Yep.
How did they react?
My family grew stronger together, and we were really bonded over this because we have a very close-knit family. We grew up in a very small house. Both my parents are deceased now, but we were raised in a very tight-knit Irish Catholic family.
How big was your house?
Our house was a 3-bedroom house. It was very small. It was probably 1,300 square feet.
With 11 people in it?
11 people in it, and a dog, and every so often a few cats. But
how many bathrooms?
1.
That's just an America that doesn't even exist.
Yeah, that doesn't. So our family grew stronger, all of my brothers and sisters, because we know each other intimately.
So all your siblings were on your side.
Yep. No, never wavered, never broke, never argued, never questioned. That they all knew from the beginning, and they were like, "Oh my God, this is unbelievable." But my family, especially my brothers and sisters, if you met them all, they are absolutely switched on to what's going on because the way we were raised. My mother was a lifelong learner. My father was a retired sergeant from the Army, and he was a treat others like you like to be treated. You're going to go work hard. But my mother was a terrific, smart person, and she was heavily involved in politics, local politics. I mean, we grew up as Democrats in Rhode Island, state of Rhode Island. So my mother was involved in state politics. She was the Right to Life coordinator for the state of Rhode Island.
As a Democrat?
As a Democrat. So we were always involved. We were always switched on to what was happening. And we've had siblings in the military. I'm one. My brother Charlie's one. My brother Billy is retired military. I have had sisters who were married to Marines and Navy folk. So service and the country has been our life. And so in all this, when Mike gets involved with Trump, then Trump suddenly wins. It's like, wow, this is a great thing. This is really, they were very appreciative that I was involved because they knew, for me, it was never about Donald Trump. And that's what people fail to see. That's what the left fails to see. They made this about a man and not the country. The American people, Tucker, they see this as the country and not the man. And that's what the left refuses to continue to see. So they keep beating on people as though they're the problem, when the real problem is the ideology that they are coming at us with right now, which is a really dangerous ideology.
Given how you grew up and your parents, your siblings, and then your own life, you got your commission in college,
right?
State University,
University of Rhode Island, yeah.
And then spend your whole life working for the federal government and fighting against wars.
Yeah.
What was it like to be called a traitor?
It was horrible. I mean, especially by the judge. in a court that was being watched by the international media. And so yeah, it was a horrible experience. I'm not gonna kid you, but what I tell people and what I believe about myself, and my wife and I have been together since we were 13 years old, so that's another aspect of my life that carried the day for me. But if I was to give anybody counsel, and I used to do this for young officers or young enlisted soldiers, don't let anybody define who you are. You decide who you're going to be.
That's right.
You decide, what you're going to be, and you define yourself. And don't let, the media define you. Don't let some boss define you. If you know who you are, if you look in the mirror at the beginning of the day and you turn away from the mirror and you're the same person, then you're doing pretty good. So I knew who I have been, who I was, and who I am. And so I just felt in my heart that the truth would eventually rise to the top, which it typically does. Sometimes it takes a while. I looked for weaknesses in the armor that was put in front of me over in the course of the Mueller investigation. That included the court as well. And when I saw weakness, I took advantage and made some really, really difficult decisions. And thank God that I had my wife to make those decisions.
How much did you struggle with rage?
None really. I'm not a vindictive person. I mean, I'm probably more optimistic than a realist. I don't have hate in my heart. I just don't.
Man, if anyone deserves to. So the one point that we haven't touched on at all is the ideology that overlaid all of this. Yeah. So let me just simplify it, and you tell me if I'm wrong. So one thing you had in common with Trump, and you were not some Trump guy from the beginning, right, but you intersected in a couple of big beliefs. And one was that after 50 years of fighting this Cold War with the Soviet Union ended, and the new adversary on the horizon was so clearly China. And that we should pivot. And the federal government, which had spent a lot of money fighting Russia, should also pivot to focus on the new threat, China. Trump believed this. You believe this.
Firmly.
But the Obama administration did not believe this. Is this correct?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So tell me about your conversations with Obama officials about Russia and China.
Yeah, so first of all, Russia is they're a big nation state. They are nuclear power, but they're really declining. I mean, they are and they know this. And so Russia as an adversary, as I got further into my career, became less and less of an issue. And actually, to me, it was we needed to figure out ways that where we were operating globally, where the United States was operating globally, if we had mutual interests, we should at least figure out ways to work with them, not necessarily, be in any kind of partnership with them. But clearly in the Middle East was a big deal, Syria particularly.
Right, if you have intersecting interests, why wouldn't you?
So China, what I started to see was this rise of China, and from my perspective, it really started about in the mid-90s. So I really started to really look hard at China from even after 9/11 and we were fighting over in the Middle East. My whole focus was on Chinese influence. And when we look at the Middle East, when we look at Central Asia, which is Pakistan, Afghanistan, Turkmenistan, all the different parts, and then you talk about India, when you look at China's influence, I started to see this massive growth of Chinese influence overseas. And then at the turn of in the middle of the Bush administration, I had a couple of key jobs there. I saw what the Chinese were doing right here in this country. And so fast forward.
What were they doing?
They were getting involved in our government structures. They were getting definitely involved in our education system. They were getting involved in Hollywood in a big way and in media. They were getting involved in real estate purchasing and just odd things like, and this is the way maybe it's the way my mind operates, but I would study different things because I was in a position most of my career where I had to be a bit flexible because I wasn't always just focused on somebody in South America. I had a sort of a global view because of the jobs that I was in with some of the airborne and the special operations that I was involved in. So I had a global view, and I really looked at the biggest adversary that we had, which was the rise of China. And I had studied.
Was it even close in your view?
What you mean as far as
compared to Russia?
Oh, not close at all. I mean, the rise of China is immense right now, and I'm very, very concerned about where we are with China. So back to your question about the administration. So as Trump and I were talking, we spent a lot of time talking about China, and he made a big deal about the trade agreements, and I was making a big deal about what the Chinese were doing in other aspects of our livelihoods here in this country and overseas. So as I begin to transition into the National Security Advisor position, so I'm the designee going in, and I didn't need to know too much about the Middle East or the war on terrorism. I had just spent years totally engaged in that, living and breathing that. That was not something that I was all that worried about. I was not worried about NATO or Russia and what was happening there, because I felt confident that we had sufficient resources there. I was more concerned about what I saw China doing. And China, stealing technology. They're involved in they've been involved in our education system for the better part of 25 years, since the middle of the 90s, if not even sooner. And
can you back up and just unpack that a little bit?
Yeah.
How have they been involved in our education?
So since about the mid-90s, the Chinese have been sending students to our graduate and undergraduate programs across the country since the mid-90s to the tune of about 100,000 a year. So when you think about that, for 25 years, if you're sending 100,000 of your students, that number has fluctuated up. So it went to like 200,000, it went to 300,000. I think that there was a year where, if I remember what I had read correctly, it was even rose about 500,000 during the Obama administration, one particular year. And it was always on one-year visas, and then under the Obama administration went to two-year visas. So you have this population of students, and they're not studying liberal arts,
Right.
They're not studying art, they're not getting art degrees.
It's not feminist poetry, no.
They're studying all of the key things: science, technology, engineering, math, all the STEM stuff. And they're taking it all, they're going right back to China, and then they're investing it. The Chinese Communist Party is now investing those students in whatever government programs they have: laboratories, the military, their intelligence, their industrial complex. And then when you start to see what they're doing here, because then I started to look, okay, well, what are they doing when they're here? And when they started to stay a year longer, I'm like, well, where are they going? What are they doing? What kind of jobs are they taking? So they're taking internships in the federal government. They're taking internships at the universities.
Chinese nationals are interning in the federal government?
They're taking jobs in laboratories, because it's like we're going to open these doors up thinking that we're going to sell them on democracy, when their government is a Chinese Communist Party, and their whole big picture in life for the 100-year plan of China, which I have read parts of it, and I would just say that 100-year plan is in effect, and it started under Mao Zedong when he took over in 1949, and their goal is by 2049 to be the global superpower. And I think that they saw over the last probably 3 decades that they could actually move that plan up even faster. Now, people are going to go, oh, Flynn's crazy. No, I'm not. I've read those documents. I know what's in those documents. And I've spoken to Chinese officers, actually, that have described what they feel and what they believe this century should be. So when America talks about, and you have had some great guests on. I'm a big fan of Victor Davis Hanson. When he talks about the 20th century, last century being the American century, right? World War I, World War II, we came out of it and we're the sole superpower, the collapse of the Soviet Union. And now here we are, 20 years of war in the first 2 decades of this century. And China's sitting back and they are just continuing to grow and grow and grow. And when we spend, and I'll give you one hypothetical that's pretty close to the truth. When we spend, let's just say, $10 billion on a weapon system, and the Chinese government steal the blueprints and spend $100 million on that same weapon system, who do you think's the smarter of the two, right? So we spend $10 billion in 10 years to build something. They steal the blueprints and they build it in a year, and now they make copies of it, and they just keep making them. And that's in all kinds of armaments in the armament industry, and the weapon systems, planes, trains, automobiles, all these kinds of things. So the thing that people have to understand in our country, that American people have to understand, is when we put people into power in this country, and I'm way off your question now about what we talked about, but this is what we talked about when I transitioned into the White House. I wanted to know what were the policies that they had for China, and why did they have those policies? Because I want to understand, I want to learn something. If they had something that was in effect that I thought was good, we'll keep it. If there was something in effect that was off the mark, then we'll change it. But I wanted to make sure that I, for this country and for that president, for President Trump, that I was going to be focused on the right adversary, the right competitor, the right level of competition that we were going to have in the world. Because people need to understand that even though we have this great, great country called the United States of America under this beautiful constitutional republic, this beautiful experiment in democracy, there are countries around the world, namely the Chinese Communist Party, that thinks their ideology and their way of life is the better way to go. And so when you look around this country and you see what the Chinese influence is in this country today, it's in every aspect of our lives, every single aspect of our lives. And I think for one president who came in, like him or not, with his America First policies, it was really about resetting this sort of stage, this geopolitical, this geostrategic stage that exists that we are playing on right now. And I think that the previous administration to Trump, I think that they cowered to the Chinese. And I feel now, as we have fast forwarded to today and to this interview, and as I look at what is happening to our country today, I think the same thing is happening again. And I am very, very concerned that this is a time where I'm not certain if it's recoverable. I like to believe that it is, but the Chinese have learned extraordinary lessons from everything going back over the last 100 years, if not the last 30. And they are very shrewd and very smart as to how they apply pressure points and how they apply their timing to do certain things. Everything is very calculated. Where in our country, you don't know what's going to happen by Saturday night. This administration's making decisions every day, and you're going, where did that come from? And it's not calculated. It's not well timed, and it's not in relationship to a long-term geostrategic political goal to keep this country, the top dog on the world stage for at least another. Through at least my grandchildren's lifetime, right?
No, it's to destroy the country, and they're doing it in very short order. So when you came in early 2017, January 2017, and you looked at what the last national security advisor had been focused on, and the federal government had been focused on internationally, how much of the money and the effort was focused on China versus Russia?
It was, they will tell you that China was at the top in terms of focus, but in terms of dollars, it was really, it's almost still dollars that were sort of under the old Soviet Union days, and now we're talking about 2015, 2016, 2017.
We were still fighting the Soviet Union.
So the Soviet Union collapsed in 1989, and we're still operating on budgets and things that still had to do with Russia, right, and the Soviet Union, and I because we built, remember, from World War II until the collapse of the Soviet Union, everything was East against West, Russia against Soviet Union against the West, and the United States principally, and so every single structure that was built, I mentioned Eisenhower, the military-industrial complex, that entire thing was built to defeat or to fight the Soviet Union. So when you have this collapse and suddenly that threat goes away and it becomes something else, it morphs into something else, you would think that wise people, really smart people, they would begin to shift away and
they would readjust.
They would readjust. I mean, it's like I said earlier about organizations. When something massive changes, you've got to change the structure and the organization and the focus. And that attraction, that addiction to the money was too powerful. I think it's too powerful.
What do you think Obama and Susan Rice thought of China? Think of China.
I think that they see them as a friendly nation that we can work with.
Do they believe, do you think, and the people, not just those two, but the people around them, the foreign policy establishment,
Right.
do they believe that China is ascendant, is going to be the global superpower? Have they given up?
Yeah, I do. I think that they look at China as, I believe that they look at China as a, the principal competitor, but also ascendant this century, and that we have got to find ways to work with them. So when in fact, by 2050, let's say, because this is 2021, so in the next 10 years, the next 20 years, if we keep going the way that we're going, China will be, this will be the century for China. And
Yes.
China knows it. They've talked about it. They actually publicly talk about it.
Of course they do.
All
Yeah.
their speeches, all their leaders, even President Xi. So I actually see this administration looking at China as going, saying, well, we're going to kind of play nice with them, and we're going to allow them to continue to do the things that they do. And I just put it into this perspective for you. If I was in the State Department, I might look at China as a diplomatic, a competitor. But as a military guy, I look at China in my military upbringing. I look at China as an adversary. I mean, just in the last 24 hours, the last 48 hours now, they flew 52 sorties over the Taiwan air interdiction zone in violation of a whole bunch of treaties. And it's just to say, we can do this and you can't do anything about it, and we don't expect you, United States, to even signal that it's happening, because we feel like you're so apathetic and you're so weak right now in your decision-making ability inside the White House and inside of the government, where we're focused on all this crazy, these social issues instead of focusing on fighting and winning the nation's wars. Now,
Do you think that China will invade Taiwan?
I believe right now that this is the highest level of threat against Taiwan that I have ever seen in my military experience and in my life, and I think in the lives of the people that are in my generation. Yes, I really do believe that the Chinese are just preparing the battlefield, so to speak, to basically take over Taiwan. And I really...
Will we do anything about that?
I honestly, I feel for the people of Taiwan, because, when you think about what happened in Hong Kong as an example. Remember 2020, the people of Hong Kong were waving American flags, and they were, they're shouting for their freedom, because Hong Kong was supposed to be one country, two states, I believe is the right phrase, where Hong Kong was going to continue to be able to operate as a sort of as a banking system, as a free market society. No more. They are totally dominated by the Communist Party. Taiwan will end up being in the same predicament if China has its way. And I don't think China is going to allow themselves to go another couple of years and potentially lose the advantage that they have with a Biden administration right now.
So you think that at some point over the next 3 years, it's likely that China will invade Taiwan?
Yeah, I believe that China is preparing the invasion of Taiwan. They have been, and then lately their actions, their military actions, are such that now I really feel that that's inevitable.
How will that's terrifying.
Yeah, it is terrifying.
How will our military respond?
Well, I think that our military's capabilities out in the Pacific, they're likely stronger than any other command and any other area of responsibility that we have. But we're not the military that we had. We don't have 5 aircraft carrier battle groups out in the Pacific, right? Like we had during the days of World War II at times. We're lucky to have a couple out there, and the Pacific is a big ocean, and the Chinese have grown in scale and scope and ability in an extraordinary manner in the last 20 years. The Chinese military is not to be messed with right now in terms of their sophistication and their intelligence collection ability. And frankly, the scarier thing for for people like me, as I think about worst case scenarios in the case of a Chinese attack against Taiwan, is what they are able to do in this country. So the Chinese have an ability to do things inside of this country that could shut down our internet. They could, look at what we've learned from all of this, all of the COVID and the Wuhan lab stuff that we have learned, the gain of function stuff. When people say gain of function, that means you're weaponizing something. You're going to weaponize a capability. You're going to weaponize a bio type of thing, right? And so that's all known now. So is that part of some other aspect of what the Chinese long-term vision is? So I tell you that because we see things in increments of time that are so small, and the Chinese look at increments of time that are very, very strategic, and they look at decades and centuries when we're looking at days, and what's coming up this weekend.
I got to ask you, given that, and for our viewers who want more, you've spoken a lot about the rise of China, and I don't think it seems paranoid at all. I think it seems absolutely right. But I want to ask you about the debacle in Afghanistan and what that means for the rivalry between the United States and China. But first, I want you to watch the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff assess what we just saw in Afghanistan.
We absolutely missed the rapid 11-day collapse of the Afghan military and the collapse of their government. I think there was a lot of intelligence that clearly indicated that after we withdrew, that it was a likely outcome of a collapse of the military and a collapse of the government. Most of those intelligence assessments indicated that would occur late fall, perhaps early winter. Kabul might hold till next spring. It depends on when the intel assessment was written.
So I think everyone agrees it was a disaster, the way that we pulled out. And you have already said you're not a pro-war guy. You served there.
Yep. Sadly.
But the way that we pulled out was damaging to the United States. What effect do you think it has going forward on our rivalry with China?
Well, so first of all, it was shameful the way that this thing unraveled. We essentially surrendered to the Taliban. We retreated, and we left Americans behind enemy lines. I mean, there's no other way to put it. And there's still Americans, citizens that are in Afghanistan. So I was really, really irritated, beyond irritated as the way this thing unraveled. The big winner in Afghanistan is China, bar none.
How?
Because Afghanistan, for anybody that studied China and really deeply understands this Belt Road Initiative that they have, which is it's a means to resources basically to the west of China, right through the Central Asia Republic, through through into Europe and into Africa, into the Middle East, and it's basically accessing resources: food, water, and energy. Those are the three principal things that the Chinese are after. So when Afghanistan, it's like a big swinging gate. When Afghanistan was turned back over to the Taliban, and the Chinese government, they held on to all of their mining leases, so all of the mines that are in Afghanistan, copper, lithium. The Chinese held on to all of them throughout the last 20 years. So they walk right back in, and they start those mines back up. So those are resources. The ability for China to not have to go too far to the north or too far to the south through Pakistan or through the Indian Ocean. I mean, these are big moving pieces. And so to have the gateway to Iran, and China and Iran are huge partners. China and Pakistan are huge partners. The Chinese and the Russians had one of the biggest trade and military agreements ever in their history. Only a couple of years ago, actually under the Obama administration is when they signed those agreements. And so we have this sort of setting now in that part of the world where China is the dominant player from the Pacific Basin all the way to West Africa. And that's pretty much, I can walk you through on a map where they're at and the bases that they've grown and the places where they're operating currently. So China is the big winner with this debacle in Afghanistan. the way that we exited Afghanistan, for all those, those people that watch this show, and all the people that had sons and daughters that served over there, my bigger concern is that the mothers and fathers of America, Tucker, will not encourage their sons and daughters to join our military.
That's for sure.
Because it's not because of the sergeants and the privates and the lieutenants and the captains that we have, because they're joining and they do their job and they're just great Americans. It's because of these leaders that are now showing their rear ends, and they're like, and I couldn't live with myself if I was military. I would have said, look, I've screwed this up. I obviously didn't read the intelligence, or I did something wrong. So, here's my stars. I'm going to resign. I just can't imagine. I can't imagine that level of leader not feeling, and for anybody in his position to say, well, I work for the president, and the president said he has every bit of confidence in me. Well, guess what? The American people probably don't. So I want the mothers and fathers of this country to believe that our military has incredible integrity, has an ability that, bar none, is the best that they're going to be. Their sons and daughters are going to be trained to the absolute best, and they're going to be led by the best people that we have in our society. And that's what's killing me right now. So here I am telling you that because I want moms and dads to still encourage their sons and daughters to join our military. But I'm telling you, it gets harder and harder for those moms and dads to say to their son or their 17 or 18-year-old son or daughter to say, yeah, go join the military after we just witnessed what we just witnessed. The 13 that were murdered by the Taliban, the 13 Marines, a sailor and a soldier that were murdered in that tragedy, that tragic attack at the gate of Kabul International Airfield. That was, I feel so bad for those young people because it was an avoidable death.
Yes.
And it's sad. So that's I feel bad about it, and I'm sick to my stomach because I do not want to say. In fact, I still encourage people to go join our military because I know the junior officers that are still there, and I know many of our non-commissioned officers, our sergeants. They're the best that we have in our society. This is the bread and butter of America, and they will still do the right thing, even when they're told something stupid. But they will treat people like the golden rule, like you like to be treated. But when we start to see politically appointed generals and admirals, which I was twice politically appointed, and I was run out because I had. Basically, they didn't agree with my views on Al Qaeda at the time. When at a certain point in time, you have to. In fact, you should never be political while you're in the military, while you're serving, ever. And I feel like our most senior leaders are becoming more political because they're adhering to things that are just nonsense. And you say, the purpose of our military, the purpose of our United States military is not to fight and participate in wars forever. The purpose of our military is to go, to be, when directed, go to war and win. Fight and win. Win. Win at all costs. Don't win, or don't participate for 20 years, 30 years, and then all of a sudden go, well, you know what, we're done participating, so now we're going to go home. And while you're leaving, you leave $90 billion worth of equipment. You get people killed on the way out the door, and we're the laughing stock on the world stage right now. And the military doesn't deserve that. The military does not deserve that. So I'm on my soapbox there. But
no, listening to you talk, though, it's just funny, and I should have figured this out years earlier, but they denounced you as a liar. But, of course, the opposite is true. They got you because you didn't lie, because you told the truth as you saw it. And I'm really glad that you survived all of this, and you did so intact. General Flynn, it's been more than an hour. We could go on. Yeah. But I hope you'll come back.
I will come back. Thank you very much.
It was great to see you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for all that you do, too, for the country.
Tucker Carlson today is the name of the show. New episodes every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday on Fox Nation. We'll see you every weeknight, 8 p.m. on the Fox News Channel.